You know, one of the big arguments often made by libertarians is why on earth does somebody who just simply braids other people's hair need a license to do so? Today, I'm going to talk in favor of licensing. Hi, welcome back to the Colorblind Architect Podcast. I'm your host, David, and as I mentioned in the intro, today I'm going to be talking about licensure. Now, why might I be talking about licensure? Well, as an architect, that is something that's really important to the profession of architecture. And I know there's a lot of people that when I give that example of the braiding of the hair, they're going to say, well, Dave, obviously, somebody who just simply braids hair for a living, why does that need a license? I agree with you that that's probably going a little bit too far. But what about somebody who's cutting the hair? Well, there's actually a historical reason why people had to brush hair, to cut hair with a license. It's because it used to be that there were outbreaks of lice and, there were other issues that would happen, and so although realistically the market would probably settle most haircutting issues, the reality is there is an advantage to having a licensing system. Now, as it relates to the medical profession, I think most people agree that they really don't want to have just some random person claiming to be a doctor, practicing medicine. That's kind of a scary thought. And, if you look back at the history of it, it used to be that doctors didn't have to be licensed. And so just any random quack could claim to be a doctor. They could say that they're a doctor. And as a result, people unwittingly, and I say unwittingly because, look, most people don't have the time, the effort, or the resources to research into the background of every single individual. And I know some people try to argue the case that, no, Dave, you're thinking like in the old days where there was no way to look up somebody's past, and nowadays you have the internet. Okay, realistically, how often do you Google search somebody before you do business with them? Now, maybe you are one of these paranoid people who do that, but I think for most people, you hear from a friend of a friend that so-and-so's a good person and that they'll take care of you. They've got, they do good business, and you do it that way. That's great. Word of mouth is wonderful. Now, what if you're new to a community and, you had just moved in, and let's say your 5-year-old daughter comes down with croup, okay? And you need to go see the doctor. You don't know who the doctors are. Now, if there's no licensing, you're just gonna look at whatever advertisements you can, because you're kind of in a hurry. You're gonna figure out, okay, like maybe you're gonna look up online who are the nearby doctors, and you're just gonna go. I mean, you're not gonna think too much about it. Take that to another example. What about lawyers? Lawyers, that's another one where, it may be a little bit difficult to distinguish their history. Now, you could make an argument that lawyers shouldn't necessarily be a licensed profession because, honestly, anybody can learn the law, and it's more about the competency. There's lots of really crappy lawyers out there, but why would you want to have a license for a lawyer? Let me give one more example. Let's go back to architecture, which is where I like to think that I have some little bit of expertise in, being that I am an architect. So you're going to have a lot of people out there designing homes. And in most states in the United States, you do not need an architecture license in order to design single-family homes or duplexes or triplexes. Basically anything up to a 4-unit apartment you can design without an architecture license. And I would say to that, yeah, great. That's been fine for the most part. In general, the reason why that kind of works is that we do have a fairly robust building review system in this country. Most states require things to go through plan review, and you have professionals working for these cities that actually review the plans and make sure that they meet code. Do I think that that's necessarily the best way of doing it? No. But on commercial structures, we require an architecture license. And why is that? Well, there's a lot of life safety issues at hand. For one thing, the fire code. Anybody who understands the history of the fire code will understand that there used to be massive loss of life in this country year after year due to buildings burning and people being trapped inside. The most recent example of a large building fire in the United States that trapped over 100 people is a fire that happened in Rhode Island at a nightclub. And this was probably back, I think this was in 2004. And you can look it up. It's a pretty famous case. And it was one where the owners of the bar clearly violated many building codes. And, you know, it's just simply, they shouldn't have been allowing the kind of pyrotechnic show that they did, especially not with such a large crowd, with doors that swing in instead of out, right? So, you know, had the nightclub hired an architect to, you know, renovate their building prior to becoming a nightclub, I think they probably would have been fine. Part of this you could also blame the city, but, you know, it's not 100% the city's issue, although it is partly that. The point is, there is a value in having licensed architects who really understand the code and, you know, are held liable for that. Because part of licensing is you hold the person liable for the decisions that they make in a design. So, for example, if I fail to meet the code, if I do something in my designs that increases the risk of light, you know, the risk of death to the occupants of the building, it's not just my business that would go down. It is my very personal well-being. I could actually be sued for my personal belongings, down to everything I own, including if there actually is, like, you know, a very gross negligence, I could actually be held criminally liable. So that's something that is unique to architecture, in that if you're a licensed architect, you are held personally and criminally liable in certain aspects if you're not upholding to all the aspects of the building code and professional standards. And so that's one of the advantages that clients have if they come to a licensed architect, is they have that assurance that the state has their back. The state has their back in protecting them from somebody being negligent. Now, on the flip side, it also protects the license holder, because by limiting the number of people who enter the profession, for example, you don't get a bunch of random people who don't know what they're doing coming in claiming to be architects. Because, by the way, in most states, I'm pretty sure it may even be every state, in most states, it is actually illegal to refer to yourself as an architect if you're not actually licensed. Same thing applies to being, trying to claim that you're a lawyer or a doctor. If you try to claim yourself as a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant or or an architect without having a license, you can actually be held criminally liable. And the reason for this is truth in advertising. Okay, there were many cases back in the old days where people would claim to have this expertise. They would claim to be a doctor or a lawyer or an architect, right? They would claim to be these things and then totally screw over the person who's paying them to perform the work. Okay? And then they would skip town with the money. Well, do you really want that? If you don't have licensing, that is a realistic possibility. Now, is it going to happen all the time? No, in fact, most people are good, honest people. This is really a means of trying to reduce the likelihood. Now, back to the reason why there's an advantage to reducing the number of licensees, okay? By keeping the licensees to people who meet the minimum standards set by the state, the advantage to that is in granting that monopoly license. And I say monopoly license as, in other words, only people with that license are allowed to practice that profession, which means that there is an artificially low number of people able to actually provide that service. Now, the advantage to this is what it does is it keeps the value, it keeps the supply low, so as the demand is higher, it keeps the prices higher. Now, why is that good? Well, because in order to actually perform the work, especially for an architect needs to have sufficient fee to perform the work. There are thousands of hours, usually hundreds, but oftentimes thousands of hours that an architect and his staff will need to spend designing a building in order for it to, be constructible to the level that, people expect, Anybody who understands the construction industry knows that you can really get screwed over by change orders. Even with honest contractors, you can easily get screwed over if your drawings are insufficient. If your drawings and specifications are insufficient, then your contractors, they're going to get into it, they're going to bid you one price, and you're going to think, oh good, I'm going to be able to get my building built. And then every time that contractor finds something that's missing from the plans or wrong in the plans, they're going to be able to charge you extra in what's called a change order. And the reason why they can do this is legally, they have an out. They can say, look, I didn't know that the building code requires this. It was missing from the drawings. I bid based on the drawings. It's not in the drawings. And so now I'm going to charge you, Mr. Owner, I'm going to charge you more money. So yet another reason why having more fee is actually good. So another advantage to making sure that your architect is well paid is giving them enough time also gives them enough time to detail it properly. So there's so many aspects to a building, so many parts of the building where if you just leave it up to the contractor to figure it out in the field, a lot of times you're going to get some really goofy and odd details. And honestly, you may also find that the building turns out kind of ugly. This happens all the time in home building. How many times have you seen an ugly home? And a lot of times it's because contractors will make changes on the fly to a house. Now, legally, they can't make the changes on the fly on a commercial structure because there needs to be a chain of custody of the changes. The way this works in commercial architecture is the contractor notifies the architect of something that needs to be corrected or changed, or maybe it's just a question that they have, and then the architect, upon reviewing it, if they realize, oh yeah, this is something that needs to be adjusted, then the architect actually changes the drawings, submits revised drawings to the contractor, and then the contractor builds it to the revised drawings. So there's actually a chain of custody to the change, right? There's actually a record of these things. Whereas in a single family home, oftentimes, because you'll have a home designer, they'll submit the plan, they'll get the plans put together, contractor will take it through the city, they'll get the plans approved, they'll start building the house. Well, during the course of construction, the contractor will think, oh yeah, I'm going to change this and this and this. Well, they can do that because there's no chain of custody. There's no record keeping per se. So, it would be very easy for a contractor to change something up like that. Now, a reputable contractor, to their credit, will actually make sure that they have the owner sign off on any of these changes, because they don't want to be held liable to a lawsuit in that case. Anyways, the point being is that a lot of these things, licensing actually helps to ensure higher quality and better safety for both the profession and also for the clientele. Finally, I just want to put it out there that another reason for licensing being so important is, if there is indeed somebody who is a bad apple, and let's say they've got their license, if there are complaints against this professional based on malpractice, they can actually be brought up on disciplinary charges. And these disciplinary charges would actually result in the person potentially losing their license. Now, if your entire business, your entire career, your way of life, your whole means of making a living is based on having this license, yeah, there's a good chance that you're going to hold yourself to a pretty high standard. Now, honestly, I would hold myself to a high standard anyways, just that's the way I was raised, and I think a lot of people would. But again, we're not talking about the general public. We're talking about the rare cases of people who have no problem behaving in a criminal manner, or a mean or angry, mean and nasty manner to hurt others for their own personal gain. And that's one of the things where I differ from libertarians. You might notice, if you've watched some of my videos, that there's, I have a tendency to say that I'm a right-leaning, I have right libertarian leanings. I say that, but there are some key reasons why I am not a libertarian, why I refuse to vote for the libertarians. And it's because they have a little bit of a Pollyannish, kind of a naive sensibility about them. They have this odd belief that somehow the market just solves everything, and that it just naturally cures itself. The problem is, in real practice, it doesn't. In real practice, when you truly have a pure free market, you're going to get some negative externalities. You're going to get some problems happening. And so that's why we have regulations. The regulations basically lay down the ground rules. It says, for example, if you're going to a stockbroker to buy you, to manage your stock portfolio, they actually have a fiduciary responsibility to you, right? They have to act in your best interest. They can't just buy and sell repeatedly, losing your money thinking, oh yeah, but I'm getting commissions on both ways, right? Now, obviously, most stockbrokers aren't going to be that douchey. They're gonna actually try to do what's right for you. But having that legal standard that they are a fiduciary and they have that responsibility to look out for your best interests gives you more leverage as a client to go after that stockbroker in a lawsuit if they are being abusive to those ends. Because, for example, you're going into a doctor, your doctor could have you under the knife, right? You could be under anesthesia, having surgery. Your doctor could be doing God knows what to you. And if you don't have a means of holding them to a higher standard, if you don't have a means of coming back after them, if they, let's say they leave a piece of surgical gauze inside your abdomen after doing appendix surgery, okay? It's not an uncommon thing, right? This is something that does happen. Well, as a result, if you don't have a legal standard to go after them, then you're just screwed. And that's the point. Licensure protects the public, not only the licensee. And so to anybody who might be a libertarian who's really gung-ho about trying to eliminate licensure, sorry I poo-pooed on your parade. But I happen to like licensure. Now, do I think that licensure has room for improvement? Yes, definitely. I think there's definitely places where, for example, I think in the architecture profession, there should definitely be an apprenticeship path. I don't think you should be required to go through schooling in order to become an architect if you have sufficient number of years. Some states still have the apprenticeship path, some states don't. Same thing with medicine. I think realistically, there's certain aspects of the medical profession where I think if you are working in the profession long enough, if you're working as a nurse for a long enough time and you've gained enough skills and you can pass the tests, sure, why not? But these are things that I think would have to be adjudicated in the legislature. And this is by each state. So, anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I probably went long. It's probably boring as hell. I'm sorry. But this is the topic that I'm discussing today. But thank you for joining me anyways. And anyways, I'm the Colorblind Architect. Peace out.